Hi, I am Anna. I come from www.ntvforex.com. Powell and Abe drive markets analysis. http ntvforex.com news ID BF14E58282020 11:44 5 am overview. After a confused and volatile reaction to the Federal Reserve's formal adoption of an average inflation target, it took Asian and European traders to embrace the signal and take the dollar lower. NBSP it is falling against nearly all the currencies and has slumped to new lows for the year against sterling and the Australian dollar. Compounding the volatility, Japan's Prime Minister Abe has signaled his intention to resign over health issues as soon as the LDP picks a successor. NBSP the yen strengthened, in line with the other major currencies, but the Nikkei fell. NBSP Asia Pacific equities were mostly lower, with Chinese, Korean, and Indian shares posting independent gains. NBSP note that New Zealand's exchange has been a victim of a cyber attack for the fourth session. NBSP European stocks are also a bit heavy and are pairing this week's gains. NBSP US shares are trading higher. The S&P 500 has a 6-day advancing streak in tow coming into today. NBSP benchmark 10-year yields are higher. NBSP Asia Pacific yields were pulled higher by the jump in US yields yesterday, and Australia's 10-year yield jumped 10 BP, and European yields are 2-3 BP higher today. NBSP the US 10-year yield is extended yesterday's rise and is now around 76 BP after reaching 78 BP, the highest since early June. NBSP gold is trading firmly, but well within yesterday's broad range. NBSP oil prices have drifted lower, and the October WTI contract is within yesterday's range, and slipping below the 200-day moving average $43.15. NBSP Asia Pacific speculation that Abe's health issues were going to force his resignation had circulated in recent days. NBSP we had thought it was more likely that today's announcement was going to be about the pandemic. NBSP however, Abe did, in fact, submit his resignation, effective after the LDP picks his successor. NBSP we recognized that there were alternatives to Abe, but less convinced about alternatives to Abenomics, which seemed like traditional LDP policy choices: loose monetary and fiscal policy and tax consumption. NBSP while some potential successors have been critical of low interest rates, it is difficult to see a different strategy. NBSP consider today's economic news from Tokyo. NBSP headline: August CPI was unexpectedly halved to 0.3% year-over-year. NBSP the core rate, which excludes fresh food, fell back into deflationary territory 0.3% from 0.4%. NBSP excluding fresh food and energy, Tokyo prices are 0.1% below year-over-year levels after being 0.6% in July. NBSP that said, the report may exaggerate the downside pressure on prices as there was a one-off drop in accommodation prices. Tokyo was excluded from the national campaign to promote travel, but the calculation uses national indices. NBSP the dollar initially extended its gains to almost 107 Japanese yen in early Asia Pacific turnover, but Abe's resignation spurred a sharp sell-off that took the greenback below yesterday's low around to 105 Japanese yen and 50 sen in the European morning. NBSP a week close today would set up a possible test on 105 Japanese yen, the August low next week, and possibly a test on the July low 104 Japanese yen. NBSP the Australian dollar extended yesterday's gains and is at new highs for the year above $0.7300. NBSP it has reached nearly $0.7325. NBSP the next important technical target is near $0.7500. NBSP the PBOC set the dollar's reference rate at 6.8891 Chinese yuan, a little above the median bank model in the Bloomberg survey. NBSP it is the fifth week, the yuan has risen against the dollar, and the fourth week it has risen against its KFITS basket. NBSP the dollar is at new 7-month lows against the yuan. NBSP the 10-year Chinese bond yield rose to 3.08%, its highest since mid-January. NBSP Europe. There are several data points from the Eurozone today, but the EMU is really outside the high drama from the Fed's new interpretation of its inflation target and the resignation of Japan's Abe. NBSP. The ECB is wrestling with low inflation, as is the US, and next week's August CPI report will underscore this. NBSP. It is reviewing its policy framework, but it is difficult to see it duplicating the average inflation targeting approach of the Fed's NBSP. Still, the official comments will be closely watched. NBSP. German GfK consumer confidence was a bit weaker, though the IFO survey earlier this week of investors showed fresh upticks. NBSP. France reported prices edged lower in August 0.1%, and this brought the harmonized measure to 0.2% from 0.9% in July. NBSP. Separately, July consumer spending was around half of what was expected, 0.5% versus 1.2%. NBSP. Part of the sting was offset by the revision in the June series to 10.3% from 9.0%, but it does suggest a loss of momentum at the start of Q3 and amid an increase in the virus. NBSP. Italy reported gains in its August confidence survey, and Spain reported softer July retail sales, 3.7% year-over-year versus 3.3% in June. NBSP. The EMU Centix surveys of consumer, economic, industrial, and service for August all improved more than expected. NBSP. The euro had traded a little through $1.19 yesterday initially on Powell's comments, but then reversed lower and fell a little below $1.1765. NBSP. Asia bid it up, and Europe has taken it to $1.1920, where the buying interest appears to be slackening. NBSP. The year's high was set a little above $1.1965 on August 18. NBSP. But it seems beyond the reach today, as momentum indicators are already stretched. NBSP. Sterling rose to about $1.3285 yesterday before pulling back as the greenback showed resilience. NBSP. Today has edged a little higher, closer to $1.3300 before the buying slowed. NBSP. Initial support is seen in the $1.3230-$1.3250 area. NBSP. The euro is little changed against both sterling and the Swiss franc, underscoring the impression that is a dollar adjustment taking place. NBSP. America. The Fed formally adopted an average inflation target. NBSP. It signals a willingness to accept higher inflation going forward because of the past undershoot. NBSP. Besides a vague reference to the medium term, it is not clear the time frame of the average. NBSP. For example, since adopting the formal inflation target in 2012, the headline PCE deflator has averaged about 1.4%. NBSP. If the Fed was to seek a 2% average rate, it needs to see a 2.5% average for the next decade. NBSP. In addition to pushing out in the time the first rate hike in a cycle, and seemingly embracing a more robust understanding of full employment, it is not clear what else the Fed will do to achieve its average inflation target. NBSP. While a new target unveiled, no new tools were. NBSP. The 10-year break even. The difference between conventional and inflation-linked yields edged up less than 2 basis points to 1.75%. NBSP. Ironically, the implied yield of the back-month Fed funds futures contracts ticked up. NBSP. The same is true of Eurodollar's futures strip. NBSP. The long end of the curve responded more along the lines one would have expected. NBSP. The 10 and 30-year yield rose by 5 and 8 BP NBSP to 75 BP and 150 BP, respectively, yesterday and have edged up a little more today. NBSP. The yields are at 2-month highs. The U.S. reports a slew of data today: preliminary July trade figures, inventory data, the University of Michigan consumer confidence, and inflation expectations. NBSP. But to the extent any of today's data will capture the market's attention, it will likely be the personal income, consumption, and deflator data. These will be important in adjusting Q3 GDP forecasts and understanding the price pressures. The headline PCE deflator, which the average 2% inflation target applies, is expected to rise to 1.0% from 0.8%, and the core measure, which excludes food and energy, which the Fed talks about, may increase to 1.2% from 0.9%. NBSP Canada reports June monthly GDP and Q2 GDP. NBSP The economy returned to growth in May 4.5% and likely accelerated in June 5.6%. NBSP However, the body blow in April was so severe that the Canadian economy likely contracted by around 39.5% at an annualized rate in Q2 after an 8.2% decline in output in Q1. NBSP The US dollar is falling against the Canadian dollar for the fourth consecutive session and will extend its slump for a sixth successive week. NBSP It is at its lowest level since January and approached 1.3060 Canadian dollars in Europe. NBSP It finished last week near 1.3175 Canadian dollars. NBSP initial resistance is now seen around 1.3100 Canadian dollars. NBSP The greenback saw a broad range against the Mexican peso yesterday, 21 Mexican pesos and 82 centavos, 22.2260 Mexican pesos. NBSP It has trended lower today and reached near 21.9550 Mexican pesos in the European morning and has begun moving sideways. NBSP A bounce could see 22 Mexican pesos and 5 centavos, 22 Mexican pesos and 10 centavos today. NBSP. Subscribe our channel to receive the news as soon as possible. Thank you for watching. If you want to read real-time news, text messages to MT5 Expert Advisors page at https://m.me/mt5.expert.advisors.